Thank you so much. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Lauren Robinson, and today I'm going to be talking about the roadmap to successful reviews, translating searches. I work here at the Medical Center Library. I'm the Associate Director of Research Services, and we have a whole group of librarians here who can help you with this process. But this is really to start to get you going on translating searches. We're going to talk about what they are. We're going to be talking about the steps for translation, some of the biases that happen during search translation, how to get ready to translate, some tools that are available. So if you watched our training from a few years ago, that training I did was on how to translate, but it was all manual translation. Now we have some tools available to you. So I'm going to be going over those as well. Oh, and thank you, Laura. The slides for this presentation are in the chat. You can click those. Everything is clickable on those slides from that link. And so you'll be able to find these tools and resources and be able to come back and review the slides. So, and then we're also the two tools we're going to talk about are SR Accelerator and Embase Query Translator. And then there'll be some time for questions at the end. Okay, so what is translation? So translation is we usually refer to it in terms of systematic reviews and other evidence syntheses projects. Every database speaks a different language, I say, right? So like PubMed uses Mesh, which we'll talk more about later, but Embase uses Emtree. And some databases like Web of Science don't use any subject headings, right? So how do you use one search that you built, let's say in PubMed, and then translate that to other databases to make sure you're reducing biases during the translation and you're making as similar of a search between databases as possible, right? And that's really important for systematic reviews and evidence syntheses because you're aiming at reproducibility, right? You need at least 3 databases. We recommend at least 3 databases for systematic reviews or evidence syntheses. But there's also other reasons you might want to learn translation. So some people like to do literature searching, right? And they like to do a little bit more advanced literature searching than just searching PubMed. This translation skill can be used even when you're doing literature searching, right? So maybe you've been searching PubMed, you can't find exactly what you want, and you might want to search you want to search Embase, right? So knowing this skill can be helpful to you, even outside of evidence synthesis practices. So like I said earlier, every database kind of speaks a different language. We call that syntax. And when you translate that syntax to the different language or the different syntax each database, we call that translation. So translation in databases involves adapting a search strategy from one database to another, like I've said. And then the syntax is often influenced by the vendor or publisher. So what I mean by that is like PubMed's created by the National Library of Medicine, Embase is created by Elsevier, and we have CINAHL is another good example, and it's created by EBSCO, right? But there's also PsycInfo, that's an EBSCO database. So there's a lot of similarities between the language each database speaks when you're talking about the same vendor, right? So the way you search CINAHL and PsycInfo are very similar. But the subject headings are still different between those databases. You still have to translate that, but the syntax, the quotes, the commas, the ands, the ors, all of that are treated the same usually within a vendor or publisher area, right? And then translation essentially means you're making a search readable and usable across a database. So why is translation important? I've talked a little bit about this already. It's important for reproducibility. When you are doing an evidence synthesis project, you actually, by the new standards put out by Prisma, should be putting your searches for every database you search, the coverages in which you search those databases into either a data repository into your protocol or into your final manuscript. So being able to do this process and document your process and know why you're doing translation and what changes you're making and what that does in a database is important for reproducibility. There's also, and it's okay to go back and make edits. So this is one thing, I'm going to start in PubMed in these demos I'm going to show you today. But PubMed is often where you want to start for all these searches because all of the tools, whether it's Embase or SR Accelerators, Polyglot, which we'll talk more about later, those tools start with a PubMed search. PubMed is freely available no matter where you are at in the world. So it's always a good place to start there. So that's what's really important. Oh, and then one thing, let's say when you start in PubMed, you sometimes find new terms when you go to, let's say, Embase and search there. You might find another term you want to include. And then you can go back and edit your PubMed search, right? It's an iterative process of translation. And you don't just go to PubMed, then Embase, then CINAHL. Sometimes you go back to PubMed and make changes because there is a reason we use subject specialty databases like Embase or CINAHL, which is a nursing database, or PsycInfo for psychiatry and psychological research. And that's because they're better at indexing their specific fields, right? So there might be a term that goes way more in depth in something like CINAHL, like especially quality improvement research, for example, which is really popular in nursing. So they might have more terms to describe that. So then you go back and add those to your PubMed search. So just remember, it's an iterative process and reproducibility is the goal. Bias in translation. So not all translation tools, and we're going to talk about them, like I said, in a little bit, but all tools have their biases, right? So the goal is to know how to translate or know what things to look for because every tool is going to mess up. I was doing a search a little while ago where I was using Embase's search query translator, and I had a subject heading in mesh that had an and in it, right? So that translator separated that term out into two keywords and I lost that term. So being able to read these searches and know what's happening in the tools is very important. A lot of us as librarians started with manual translation. So if you've never done this before, it might be fun to take like a small search that you have and try and translate it yourself and see what happens and then use these tools and see what went wrong, what went right. It's a learning process, I will say. So if you're not familiar with each database you plan on searching, there's always a help feature too that will tell you what different things mean, what a quotation means, what like the curly Q brackets mean in some databases. The help tool in each database is very helpful for that translation. And just be aware of the biases that exist in tools that you're using. So choosing your databases for systematic searching can also introduce bias. Databases themselves have an inherent selection bias. Like I said, CINAHL is a nursing database. Web of Science is a really large database that is searching several indices. So if you're just searching Web of Science, you're searching some arts and humanities stuff, you're searching emerging resources, you're searching conference abstracts and dissertations. So that can insert bias if you're not considering what you're searching. So if you have a multidisciplinary topic, you also need to search more databases to make sure you're covering the topic. So your database, if you don't choose the right databases, you can insert bias into your search. And then choosing terms. Term selection is a critical piece of this process to limit bias in systematic searching and your translations. Like I talked earlier, it's an iterative process. Go back and editing things. Your search terms are your variables for this type of research. So if you miss a variable that a certain researcher defines something as, you're introducing bias. So just be aware, like when you're doing evidence synthesis, this is really more geared toward evidence syntheses and systematic reviews, that you have to be very careful with your term selection and making sure you're translating those properly to reduce bias. With literature searching, it's not quite as instrumental, right? Literature searching, you're not really worried that much about bias. You're trying to find the best articles, while these type of searches are trying to catch everything that's out there. So just as a quick note, we have our systematic review guide, and this video will be uploaded there. We have our older video there as well that talks about like manual translation. And there's a lot of other tools here. We have tools for documenting your search, which is really important for this process as well. We have tools on how to search the databases. So like, again, this translation session we're going through is really more about the act of translation. If you're very new to searching, you will want to go back and review some of these materials. And I'll have another tool here in a moment. I'll show you, it's our Learn to Search page as well. But the Systematic Review Guide is a great place to start because there's a lot of resources and tools that are downloadable here. We also have a database list here that are the most commonly searched databases here at UK Libraries. We have hundreds, but we kind of limit down the ones in the health sciences that people most commonly search. And you can see the coverage is there. You can download that and reuse it. It has a Creative Commons license on it. So that's helpful for when you're translating and trying to select a database. Okay, so translation steps, what do you do? So the first thing, like I said earlier, is you want to create a preliminary search in PubMed. And I say PubMed because it's freely available. And every other tool I'm going to show you today starts with a PubMed search. So that's the best place to start. It's also really it's a really comprehensive database. With these type of searches, you're often wanting to include subject headings and keyword searching. So starting in PubMed helps with that because MESH, which are the medical subject headings, and we'll talk some more about that too, is like just very extensive and can really help you kind of narrow your topic in. So once you have the PubMed search, you're going to input that search into a translation tool. We'll talk about those in a moment. You're going to edit your translation, so you're going to want to check the syntax. So like the parentheses, the periods, the ands, the ors, the curly Q brackets, whatever tools you're using, whether, because there are operators people aren't as common or don't use as much, like a within operator, near operator. Those all look different in each database. Each database might have different truncation. So like an asterisk is usually what you use for truncation, but there are other options in other databases. So you need to use a user manual or talk to a librarian if you have questions about that process. And just make sure you're double checking. The goal of these tools is to help you speed up that translation process, not always be perfect. If you add any extra terms, make sure you go back and add them to your original PubMed search to keep them as similar as possible. That's really important for evidence synthesis searching. If you're just doing a literature search, it probably doesn't matter. But that number 4, I will say just for evidence synthesis work. And then you finalize both searches and then run them all and export your data. And then of course there's going to be duplicates there. That's a whole nother process. We have some tutorials that walk you through how to deduplicate. But the goal of these type of translations process is to catch as much literature as possible about your topic. And then of course there's going to be duplicates, right? Like Embase also searches Medline, which is what PubMed searches, but it has some unique records too. So that's the benefit of translating and pulling in more data. Okay, so before translation, you absolutely must be confident that your initial PubMed search is as close to complete as possible, because again, you don't want to have to be making these changes over and over and over again, because that increases your risk of error, right? So just be aware. The only thing I really recommend is like adding terms. I wouldn't worry too much. Like you should have your ors and your ands and things kind of sorted out before you do your PubMeds or before you translate. During translation, it's okay to go back and make edits to your PubMed search. Like I've said, I have found errors before. So like the translation's a really good tool to like catch a syntax error or like you forgot to close a quote or something. PubMed's better about that now. It will catch it for you. But again, it's okay to make mistakes, and this process does help you catch those mistakes. And the goal is to have the searches match as much as possible. Again, like I've said, but really only for evidence syntheses and systematic reviews, not really for literature searching. So this is our Learn to Search page. So like I said earlier, the purpose of the presentation today is not to teach you how to create an initial search. We have lots of tools, a lot of things online that can help you with that. And you can set up a consult with one of our librarians if you do need that help. We do have this tool called Learn to Search, which is available to you. It teaches you about subject headings, Boolean operators, how to do phrase searching, what are field codes, what is truncation, and lots of other things on here. There's some video tutorials. There's also some like interactive, I guess, tutorials that you can click on to see how to read a PubMed entry and read about an article in PubMed, things like that are all available here. Okay, so we're going to use this PubMed search example. So this is actually a search I did for a systematic review, and it's available in Search Archive, which is a repository for search strings. And so this search is about diabetic retinopathy and telehealth and assessment for diabetic retinopathy. So we're going to use this one. So translating tools, like Google Translate, the tools we're going to talk about, SR Accelerator's Polyglot and Embase's PubMed Query Translator, these tools translate your searches so they can be read by other databases. So it's very much like Google Translate. Again, there can be errors. Like I said, I've had one with Embase. Just be aware to double check. These tools are free to access. I would say Polyglot is free to access. I believe Embase PubMed's Query Translator, you actually have to be a subscriber to. So you have to be affiliated with UK. I don't believe there's anyone on this call that's not affiliated, but if you're not affiliated with UK, your institution may have Embase and you can access the Query Translator through there. But you can't just Google it. But SR Accelerator's Polyglot is freely available to anyone, anywhere. So even if you end up not affiliated with an academic institution in the future, SR Accelerator Polyglot will be available to you. So SR Accelerator Polyglot, so it includes multiple database options and it's free and easy to use. So let's go on here. So this is Polyglot and SR Accelerator. So SR Accelerator is the big name of the product. It's developed by some researchers out of Australia. They've done some really great things to make this stuff freely available. So there's word frequency user tools over here, which are great for building evidence synthesis searches. There's Search Refinery and some other tools. We have some trainings on these as well if you're interested in learning more about them. Those are available on our guide, but you can always have a consult with a librarian too. But the one we're going to talk about today is Polyglot. So this link took us directly here. This is Polyglot. I'm going to go back and pull my search really quick from my slide. I'm going to copy that. And this is what you would do. You would be in PubMed, you would copy your final search, and then you would go to SR Accelerator. All you do is you paste that search string into here. And what it does is it translates it for you all the way down here. So for example, here's Embase. So Embase can be searched multiple ways. So like I said, there's different publishers and vendors. Elsevier is the one we here at UK have. So this is the one you would want to use if you're going to use SR Accelerator Polyglot. We don't have this one, but I just want to point out Embase Ovid. You can see this looks different, right? That's that vendor and publisher difference that I was talking about. Like you can see they use TW as a field code and Embase Elsevier uses TIAB and you might see TIAB KW as well. So that's like what I was talking about the difference in publishers. But the one you want to use here at UK is Embase Elsevier. Another cool thing is it does CINAHL. So this is that nursing and allied health database I was talking about. You can see here that it's translated everything to TIAB. So that's your title abstract. Those are those field codes that we were talking about earlier. And then here are your subject headings, the MH. So I mentioned earlier that CINAHL and PsycInfo are both EBSCO host databases. So a little trick is you can use this for PsycInfo. You just have to change your subject headings. And I believe I have a slide about that in a moment. Like for MH is the subject heading for CINAHL. I believe DE is for PsycInfo. The only thing also about this is only translating the syntax, right? It's only changing your field code, which are these green things. It's changing your subject heading, just telling it it's a subject heading. It's not changing the actual subject heading. You'll have to go into each database and go to their subject headings. And we do go over this in some of our other tutorials. Like CINAHL has their own subject headings. You go to that and you find the subject heading for diabetes type 1, and then you copy and paste that into here, right? So just be aware this is really a syntax translator. It's not really translating language. You still have to go translate the language. Again, title abstract, that's already in there. That language isn't changing from database to database. It's really the subject headings that are different. And we also have Web of Science here, which is available to you here at UK as well. There's two different ones. I tend to use this one and then use the topic search inside of Web of Science, but that's available here. And there's lots of different ones here. Those are the main ones that we use here at UK. And then also Cochrane Library is another one we have. So that's how I use Polyglot. It's super easy. So that's, yeah, so let's go back and go back to our slides here. Okay. And then, so just for your a refresher, I already kind of walked through this. You can always come back to these slides and reuse them if you want to use Polyglot. You just copy and paste your search string. You select your databases. So again, here's that CINAHL one. And then this is a link directly to Polyglot for you, so you can use it in the future. You can also Google SR Accelerator Polyglot, go to our guide, it's linked there. You will find it lots of places. So Embase Query Translator, it's a fairly new tool and I really like it. And so I want to talk about it today. So Embase Query Translator only translates from PubMed. So you can take a PubMed search and put it into Embase and get a search. I actually like this one a little bit better than Polyglot, just because it expands things a little bit more, and I'll show you what I mean by that. It's only available through Embase, so you have to access Embase from our Health Sciences database link, which is going to be in the chat for you. It's Embase, it's on the Medical Center Library site on our Health Sciences database page, and you can access it there. So when applicable, or the one thing I really like about Embase Query Translator is that it actually does translate the subject headings for you. And I'll show you what that means in a moment. So like I said in the last one, SR Accelerator, it's not translating language, it's only translating like the syntax. This one actually does change some of that language for you of the subject headings. And so it just helps save you time. So we're going to talk about that one a little bit. I'm going to open it up. And this is just like there is a help tool on the side that tells you like what the different things mean. So let's get into that. So one thing about Embase and PubMed, I want to kind of give you this caveat before I show you how Embase translate, is PubMed uses medical subject headings. So you can see here, you can search mesh from the PubMed website, from the mesh page, lots of ways to access it. In this one, you can see we type type 2 diabetes, and it gives us like this entry with a definition and the year it was added, the year it was updated, things like that. One thing about Mesh is that, and PubMed, is that it automatically explodes. And I like to cover this because this is a unique thing to PubMed, and it affects how you translate searches, right? So you can see here, diabetes type 2 is under diabetes here, and there's some ones underneath it. This is called a tree structure. So the further you go up, the more broad the term, the further down, the more narrow. If I search type 2 diabetes here, it's going to search everything underneath it, which isn't a lot here, but it can be a lot for things like rehabilitation. It's a very large tree. So just be aware that PubMed is doing this because it's not automatic in other databases that this happens. You actually have to tell it, like in that CINAHL example, the little plus sign at the end, that was telling it to explode. So those translators do help you with that. But you do need to recognize that not everything explodes in every database. So you can tell something not to explode in PubMed, which is really great for things like rehabilitation, because you can do rehabilitation mesh, no explode, and then pick the forms of rehabilitation you want to search. So that can help narrow things too. So, and then I kind of go in that to here, it automatically searches everything underneath it. So this will be a reminder for you all in the future. Okay, so entry is the controlled vocabulary to Embase. So you have mesh for PubMed, entry for Embase. And Embase doesn't, like, I think when you're searching inside of entry, it does automatically explode, but it's not, you have to tell it to explode. That's what this EXP right here means, right? And you'll see what this means when I translate in a moment. But this EXP is then telling it that everything underneath diabetes needs to be exploded in search. So type 1, type 2, all the other forms of diabetes. So in entry, you're going to use EXP to tell it to explode. So so in PubMed, you can just say mesh, it's going to explode. You then have to tell entry to explode it, right? So I'm going to do a live demo of this too with this diabetic retinopathy search I have. But this is just a kind of a reminder of what that looks like and what it looks like in Embase. And then here's the PubMed query. And I'm going to do this live in a moment. And here's the translation just for a refresher. So let's go on back to the entry. I have it open. So this is or not entry, Embase. Here's Embase. If you ever want to search entry, it's right up here at the top. I'm not going to get into that today. We do have some trainings on Embase and things if you want to learn more about entry. But we're going to really talk about is this query translator here. So you click that. And then, so you can see here's that translation tool information. It gives you some reminders about EXP. It gives you some reminders of what's happening. If it highlights something red or yellow or something like that, it will tell you there's no translation for that term. So this is really good to reference. So let's pop that search string over here into the Embase query translator. And let's hit translate. Okay, so here it is. So you can see that it did translate diabetic retinopathy perfectly fine. It's not highlighted, nothing's there or underlined, so you're good. You can see here that it did TIABKW. I like this search. I think some of my colleagues just do TIAB still, like with Polyglot. This one's just going to be broader. It's going to do title, abstract, and keywords. So it searches some more fields. But this underline one, is something you'll want to consider looking at. So you can see that it says non-insulin dependent. This was a different term. No exact match was found in entry from diabetes type 2. So it translated it to this. So you want to check these underlined terms and make sure they're things you want to include. Like in this one, I would want to revisit diabetic complication. It was a mesh term. Diabetes complication. So this one I would include because it's just a difference in the S, right? Diabetic complication versus diabetes complications, right? So mesh, it says diabetes complications. Well, in entry, it's diabetic complication. That's fine. No big deal. But sometimes you do catch things here that are a little bit odd. So like I said, when I've had things with ands in there, sometimes it separates them and underlines them. So just be aware what these things are and you can click on them. You can actually see the tree structure of entry over here. You can click on them. You can see more about it underneath it, so forth and so on. So this is helpful. You can go back up to entry and copy and paste it to read the definition if you want. Just be aware of what's happening here. And you can see in PubMed too, like when you're doing phrase searching, you will search something with double like quotations. Here it's a single quotation there. So like that's the translation. That's a different language, the syntax change. So from there, you can, again, always review every single piece. I go through and review every single term, make sure it translated properly. But let's say I did that, everything's good. You can hit show 1400 results and it will run it for you. And then you can view your results. So this used to take hours to translate all these searches. Now you can use these really great tools to help speed up the process. Okay, so let's go back here to my slides. So this is just kind of reminders on what it's doing. So you can see that this one was underlined gray, like I mentioned. So just want to come back and these slides you can come back to and review some of the things I highlighted today. So things to check, syntax. I've been saying this the whole time. Check your field tag. So those are that title, abstract, keyword, title, abstract, those things. Check your quotation marks. Make sure those are all correct. Make sure there's no duplicates. Check your parentheses. This is really important for databases like Scopus because different parentheses and curly Q brackets can mean different things. So I don't recommend trying to do Scopus for like really thorough searching just because it does do a lot of different things. But most of the other databases I've talked about today general parentheses are going, I always say it's going to be like orders of operations from like algebra and like learning math. Everything in parentheses goes first. So just make sure all those parentheses are correct. And then truncation, check your truncation marks. Most of the databases I talked about today use the asterisks at the end of a word, but some databases can use question marks. Some of them even allow you to do truncation in the middle of a word. So if you are investigating those forms of truncation, be aware not every database does that. So you'll have to change that from database to database. Controlled vocabularies. I mentioned this earlier, but make sure you're using the proper controlled vocabulary. Polyglot, again, does not translate the language part of your controlled vocabulary. You have to go into the subject heading databases and find the proper term for each database. The Embase search query translator will only do that from PubMed to Embase, and you still have to double check those, right? Because, it's not perfect. So it does do a little bit of that language work for you. So again, you can go and view the query translator here. And that's all I had on translation. I'd be happy to answer some questions. And also there's going to be a survey. So please fill out the survey. It's going to be in the chat. You'll get it in a follow-up email. We really appreciate this, or if you can do that, and appreciate you coming today. And leave us any feedback of future sessions you would like. And I will hang on and answer any questions you have.